Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander recently shipped out from the Street Fighter II Secret Lair, Zangief the Red Cyclone. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with a Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Zangief is a 7/4 human warrior for 2 generic, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green. He has indestructible as long as it's your turn, and he must be blocked if able. These two abilities are relevant with his triggered ability. Whenever he deals damage to a creature, if that creature was dealt excess damage this turn, his controller sacrifices a non-creature, non-land permanent. What's important to pay attention to is how this ability is worded. It's not limited to combat damage. This means that if Zangief is dealing non-combat damage, whether because he's fighting or dealing direct damage, that'll still trigger his ability. Thus, I decided to make the most of all of Zangief's abilities by making him quite the beater as well as a fighter. On his own, he's a 3-turn clock, but with some Voltron goodies, he could take out an opponent in one shot. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. First, let me go over how you can capitalize on Zangief's triggered ability. While this isn't just when he blocks or gets blocked, so why not speed up the process and deal direct damage on command whenever we want to. Domri Arnak of Bolus, Vivian of the Arkbow, Vivian Arkbow Ranger, Ulven Wall Tracker, Magus of the Arena, Burning Anger, and Predatory Urge help with just that. Whether the ability is straight up fighting or not, so long as Zangief is able to deal damage equal to his power to another creature, we're set. Fighting per se will matter, but only for a single card, which we'll see in a bit. As for these, all 3 of these Planewalkers can make Zangief fight another creature with their first negative loyalty ability. This means that we don't be able to do it each turn, but at least it can get rid of a creature that needs killing, as well as potentially forcing that opponent to sacrifice a non-land, non-creature permanent. We also have to activate these at sorcery speed, but that's okay because Zangief is only indestructible during our turn anyways. All of their other abilities are relevant in this deck as well, except for Vivian Arkbow Ranger's ultimate because wish effects don't work in Commander. The 2 auras require tapping down Zangief for him to deal direct damage, but this is fine. We can choose whether it's better to attack with him or to tap him down to get rid of a key creature an opponent won't ever block with. This ability can also be activated at instant speed in a pinch. The other 3 are the ones that tap down, and thus we can both attack with Zangief but still use him to deal direct damage. All 3 effects are fighting effects, so while we can activate these at instant speed, Zangief is only indestructible during our own turn, so keep that in mind. Also, Arena does not tap for mana, so I would not consider it as a land slot in the deck. Chandra's Ignition is another way to have Zangief deal direct damage, and boy is this a bomb in this deck. For just 5 mana, you're dealing at least 7 damage to each creature and opponent. 7 damage is nothing to scoff at, and more than likely will be excess damage to creatures. This does hit your own creatures as well, but the deck is relatively light on creatures, so it's fine if we end up getting burned by it. So use this only when it's going to either win you the game, or when you're in dire straits. Blazing Sunsteel and Fiend Lash are some more direct damage effects, but are more judo style. These require Zangief to be hit, but that's usually going to be the case since he has to be blocked if possible at minimum. If he's fighting other creatures, then he's going to get hit as well. You can then redirect that damage to an opponent's face to make short work of them. So even if Zangief's getting blocked or getting rid of creatures, he'll still be hurting our opponents. Mage Slayer does something similar in that it makes it moot to block Zangief. Granted, the damage dealt is not commander damage, so combat is better. But even if he gets blocked, you're still hurting the defending player, which is amazing. Kusarigama and Lakalith Rig are some more ways of dealing direct damage to creatures via triggered effects. Kusarigama is absolutely disgusting here, since you can potentially wipe the defending player's board since they're forced to block Zangief with at least 1 creature. And not only that, but you can sink your mana into it to give him +1/+0 for 2 generic at a time. The aura might not seem as impressive, but it puts opponents in a lose-lose situation. If they block Zangief with a creature they don't care to throw under the bus, you can simply not have Zangief deal damage to that blocker, and instead, deal damage equal to its power to some other creature. This enchantment is ridiculous and costs only 1 red. It's also quite obscure, so you'll definitely get some kudos for running this unknown card. Now that we've seen how to deal direct damage, why not amplify that damage with damage multipliers? These also work with combat damage, so they're a no-brainer to include. Two-Handed Axe, Inquisitor's Flail, Mr. Orfeo the Boulder, Neith of the Dire Hunt, Xenaghost, God of Rebels, Obosh the Prey Piercer, Fiendish Duo, Unnatural Growth, and Gratuitous Violence do just that. Well, some of these don't double damage per se, but they do essentially double Zangief's power, which boils down to the same effect in practice. So it's essentially a way to double damage. Neith is the card I mentioned earlier that cares about whether your creatures are literally fighting. Every time they do, we draw a card. Not only that, but whenever a creature we control gets blocked, we draw a card too. Since this synergizes with Zangief's abilities, Neith is definitely an auto-include here. The equipment are pretty solid here, especially since we can send Two-Handed Axe on an adventure. Pretty weird sending an inanimate object on an adventure, but I'm no flavor judge. In any case, it can give Zangief double strike at instant speed and then be cast from exile to beef him up. The flail has him receive double damage, but that doesn't matter during our own turn. We do have to be careful outside of our turn though. Mr. Orfeo and Xenaghost double Zangief's power when he attacks. While this not being static might seem like a drawback, his power is still doubled until the end of that turn, so anything that cares about his power will still be relevant, so keep that in mind. As a bonus, Xenaghost is also indestructible, which is going to matter later on. Unnatural Growth also doubles power and toughness too at the beginning of combat, but it's each combat step, meaning that Zangief will also receive that boon at each player's turn, which can be quite helpful for blocking or fighting. It does have 4 green pips in its casting cost, but that's not that difficult to pay for with this deck. The remaining 3 do straight up double the actual damage dealt by our creatures, with Obosh being limited to only doubling the damage by odd costed sorcerers we control. At least the doubles also double all damage dealt to our opponents regardless of who controls the source of that damage. And best of all, it's not restricted to direct damage. With all of these damage doubling effects, it's a shame that Marrow's Gone Nuts is a playtest card and not legal in Commander. If it were, all of these previously mentioned effects would be ridiculous. And for just 2 green mana too. Hopefully we get a black bordered version soon, just like Enchantment Ties being reprinted as One with the Stars. In any case, it won't work with the following cards, Fiery Emancipation and Jessica Thrice Reborn, because they triple damage, not double it. These effects are super busted here. Recall that Zangief triggers off of XX damage, so I'm pretty sure multiplying his damage will get him there. I haven't really used Jessica's final ability much, since there are already so many other ways of dealing damage, and we want to keep her around as long as possible. Speaking of excess damage, did you know that if a creature has Deathtouch, then any damage beyond the first point is considered excess? Well, now you do. This is why Basilisk Collar, Shadow Spear, Sareth the Viper's Fang, and Gift of the Deity are included in the deck. If Zangief has Deathtouch, then any creature that blocks him will always receive excess damage and will thus trigger his sacrifice effect. Not only that, but the first equipment also gives Zangief lifelink, which is pretty critical. The deck doesn't have many creatures, so we're prone to getting smacked ourselves, although that's not as common and the deck has plenty of ways against that, which we'll soon see. However, Zangief with lifelink is still a nice bonus. Sareth also gives the bonus of not only untapping Zangief, but giving hexproof to our untapped creatures. This is super important because we don't want him stolen or getting dealt with, but we'll see the other protective effects soon. The aura is super busted here. Not only does Zangief get Deathtouch, but he gets +2/+2 and a lure effect. If every creature defending player controls has to block Zangief if they can, this means that Zangief can kill up to 9 of them at once, since he only has to deal 1 point of his 9 power to each of those blockers in order for it to be lethal damage. Keep in mind that if you do this, you're trading killing off each creature for the sacrifice effect, since 1 point of lethal damage won't have any excess damage left over. But you are potentially killing off your board, which is great. Speaking of lure effects, the deck's also running Nemesis Mask and Tempting Lycid. Giving Zangief Deathtouch while also making each creature block him is such an oppressive thing to do. Best of all, the Lycid won't go to the graveyard if Zangief is dealt with so long as you keep 1 green mana open. You can turn it back into a creature as a special ability, so it doesn't even go to the stack when you do. So that's some nice tech to consider. Nylea, God of the Hunt, Runes of the Deus, Scepter of Celebration, Keswick Wolfrun, and Skarg the Rage Pits are some more ways to make the most out of Deathtouch by giving Zangief Trample. Trample with Deathtouch is another oppressive combination. Not only will Zangief give the rest of his damage as excess damage for his own trigger, but it's going to also go to the defending player's face as combat damage and thus commander damage. Nylea is the best of these since she also functions as a mana sink to pump Zangief as well as giving trample to all of our other creatures. She's also indestructible, which will be relevant later. The aura also has the added bonus of giving Zangief +2/+2 and double strike along with trample. If Zangief has Deathtouch, that means that he kills the blocker with just 1 point of damage and the rest goes to the opponent's face. Then the second hit will hit them entirely. The Scepter is also ridiculous if Zangief is able to hit an opponent while having an absurdly high power. While I did mention that the deck isn't that worried about creature heavy decks, being able to create a ton of weenies are great for chump blocking as well as going on the offensive, especially when we have effects granting Deathtouch to all of our tapped creatures or the damage multiplying effects. The 2 lands are also amazing, with the former being a mana sink. Best of all, these don't take up slots in the deck. Rogue's Passage is the best land though, since it helps bypass Zangief needing to be blocked. If we're in a situation where we can't get through with commander damage, and Zangief is getting blocked and going nowhere, making him unblockable can win us the match outright, since it's so easy to get his power to 21 and greater. Now let's go over the rest of the cards in the deck that synergize with the main focus of it, which is swinging in with Zangief for value, as well as spreading as much damage around as possible. Turgid Grot of Fright is an amazing way to steal whatever non-creature, non-land permanent your opponents are sacrificing to Zangief's ability. Any key artifacts, planeswalkers, and enchantments are more than welcome on our side of the board. Turgid is so good here that her backside half might as well not exist. Kediss Emberclaw Familiar is another auto-include in the deck, since it helps spread the love around. While the damage isn't combat damage and thus not commander damage, the way Kediss works with damage multipliers is what makes him so dangerous. Let's say we have Fire Emancipation in play. If we hit an opponent with Zangief and they take it all, they're receiving 21 commander damage and thus dying. However, since Zangief dealt 21 combat damage to that opponent, he's going to then deal thrice as much damage to all other opponents, dealing them a whopping 63 direct damage, potentially taking them out as well. This card needs to be in here. Druid's Call is another spicy card to include and is similar to Scepter of Celebration, but will most likely give you way more 1/1 creature tokens than the Scepter ever will. And that's because Zangief will get hit with more damage than he's dealing combat damage to players with. The Scepter is included because of the boost in power and trample, but this aura is a great way to really increase our board presence and make opponents uncomfortable with how quickly we're destroying their boards while building ours, especially if we're fighting with Zangief at every opportunity. As for making the most of Zangief being indestructible during our turn, the deck is running Obliterate, Jokel Hops, and Devastation. Yes, these sorceries also hit lands along with creatures. Are these type of spells looked down upon in the general commander sphere? Yes. However, that's because they're not utilized properly. If we wipe all creatures and lands while only keeping Zangief, and potentially any enchantments and or planeswalkers that can boost his power, the game will be over. These spells are not used to reset the game, but to guarantee victory. You can definitely omit them if you want, but there's still amazing board wipes we can use. Same with World Slayer, which is a repeatable board wipe. Each time Zangief connects, we're destroying everything except Zangief and World Slayer. Well, we also get to keep Xenagos and Nylea, remember? Which is why this can help close out games. Or you could be extra evil and cast the deck's Heroic Intervention in response to any of these board wipes. Opponents tend to scoop afterwards, conceding you the victory. But again, you can opt out of these 4 cards, not the Heroic Intervention though, and include other similar effects like Blasphemous Act, Damnation, etc. Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, Hammer of the Zon, Guardian Augmenter, and Asceticism are the rest of the protective effects in the deck apart from the previously mentioned Heroic Intervention. Giving Zangief hexproof is super important since the deck is mostly Voltron and centered around him. The hammer in particular giving him indestructibility in the absolute sense is also great. However, it also gives Zangief a boost in power as well as helping attach equipment onto him. In fact, it auto-attaches when it enters the battlefield too. This is great for saving mana with equipping equipment to Zangief. Asceticism being able to regenerate a target creature is great for those effects that destroy, but still allow regeneration, or for just lethal combat damage and or direct damage. The following cards in the deck are the essential responses, card advantage, and mana acceleration of any deck. It's pretty clear that the deck has no problems getting rid of creatures and, if we're lucky, opponents will be sacrificing their non-land, non-creature permanents quite often. However, you know I have to run Beast Within, Chaos Warp, and Assassin's Trophy. Last thing we need is an opponent running Maze of Ith type lands that are total wrenches in our plan. This is another reason why the previously mentioned mass land destruction effects are also good. In any case, these 3 instants are amazing catch-alls and should definitely be in here. Infiltration Lens and Bonder's Enclave are great repeatable card draw effects, especially the equipment since Zangief needs to be blocked. We're basically drawing 2 cards for free each combat step. The land doesn't even take up a slot on the deck, which is great. Garruk Primal Hunter, Rishkar's Expertise, and Soul's Majesty have the potential of drawing us an insane amount of cards since they're based on the power of a creature we control. We lose Garruk if we do it immediately, but if we don't need the cards at the moment, we can uptick him first and then try and keep him around. The deck draws into so many cards that Reliquary Tower is included just in case. Just imagine how many cards you'll draw if you cast any of those previously mentioned spells when Zangief's power has been doubled multiple times in that same turn. There's a high chance of drawing into this land and playing it to keep your hand. Also, while it seems that this and so many other lands are colorless in a 3-colored deck, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth are included for good measure. That way our utility lands, and even fetch lands if we wanted to, can tap for relevant colors when needed, or the basics tapping for more than one. Speaking of basics, Sword of the Animus and Ber Umbra are definitely included. We want to be attacking with Zangief. Getting a basic land each time we do is amazing. The +1/+1 is a good bonus too. The aura is amazing as well since we can play all of our things first, attack, and then untap our lands. If we're also drawing cards, things get out of hand very quickly. Not only that, but the aura gives Zangief +2/+2 and totem armor, if that weren't enough. Farseek Nature's Lure, 3 visits, Into the North, Rampant Growth, Cultivate, and Kadama's Reach are some more ways of ramping for lands. The deck's running all 3 snow duels as well as 9 snow-covered basics, so Into the North has plenty of options here. That way we can be very efficient with how quickly we can ramp. That being said, Traverse the Outlands is included because of how busted it is with the 7-powered commander. While the other ramp spells are between 2 and 3 mana, with this one, once Zangief is on the battlefield, we can cast this and get up to 7 basic lands onto the battlefield tapped for just 5 mana. Ridiculous. Soul Ring is the only mana rock in the deck, and that's because Mass Artifact Hate is way more common than Mass Land Destruction. In fact, we are more than likely the only ones at the table with Mass Land Destruction spells. But again, it's used to close out games, not extend their duration, so if you don't like them, you can take them out. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands, all 3 shock lands, all 3 snow duels, Ziatora's Proving Ground, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 3 of each snow-covered basic land due to all of the basic ramp effects in the deck, as previously mentioned. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Zangief the Red Cyclone. This was a very fun deck to brew and play with because there are so many things you can do with him that also overlap. So the Voltron strategy is complemented with the Judo strategy, which is also complemented by the damage increasing effects. However, if the immersion break is too much for you, we still have to wait for the Universes Within versions of the Street Fighter 2 cards to be printed. That being said, if you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Medic Kirby, and happy brewing.